"Give me kids or I die," she begged the lonely mountain man. In the dead of winter, a rugged man opens his cabin door and finds a desperate woman collapsed in the snow. Her words shake him to the core. She'd rather die than see her sisters, children taken away forever. He swore he'd live out his days alone. But one marriage of convenience may be the only thing that can save them all. Yet as church bells toll and the judge's gavel falls, a darker truth emerges. Powerful men want the children gone, and the law is not on their side. Bribes, lies, and a stolen deed could tear apart the only family they have left. Now, with snow falling heavy and time running out, two broken souls must fight for 3 innocent lives. Will this unlikely family be torn apart by greed and prejudice, or will faith and courage be enough to keep them together? Every story brings us a little closer together. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. It's a joy to see how far this family of listeners reaches. The snow fell thick and heavy outside Elijah Boone's cabin window, each flake catching the dim lamplight like a ghost. His bones ached from the day's work, checking trap lines, the familiar pain of loneliness settling deeper than any winter chill. The crude log walls seemed to close in tighter each passing season since Sarah's death. He stirred the meager fire, watching the stranger woman's chest rise and fall beneath the pile of wool blankets. Her dark hair spread across his only pillow, damp with melting snow. In her fever, she mumbled words in Spanish, then Apache, her hands clutching at invisible things. "Give me kids or I die," she'd whispered before collapsing. The words haunted him now as he ladled venison stew into his best tin cup. What children could she mean? And why had God sent her to his door of all places when he'd sworn off helping folks years ago? The woman's clothes told a story he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. Her skirt showed signs of Mexican needlework, but her shawl bore Apache patterns. The fabric was worn thin, with careful patches that spoke of poverty. Her boots were nearly destroyed from hard travel. "Here now," he murmured, touching her shoulder gently. "Try to drink some broth at least." Her eyes fluttered open, fever bright, but more focused than before. "The children," she whispered, trying to sit up. "I must find them." "Easy there?" Elijah supported her head, helping her sip the hot broth. "You're in no state to go anywhere. Storm's gotten worse besides." "No time." She pushed the cup away, though her hand shook. "They will take them to the orphan train. Separate them, please." Elijah's chest tightened at the desperation in her voice. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Maria. Maria Santos." She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "My sister's children. They are all I have left. The railroad men, they say mixed blood children. The better off in Eastern homes. But they are my heart, my family." The words struck him like physical blows. Family. Heart. The very things he'd walled himself off from since Sarah died in his arms, taking their unborn child with her. He'd blamed himself for not getting her to town in time, for not knowing enough about healing. After that, the mountain became his only companion. 3 children, Maria continued, her words growing urgent. "Mateo is 10 years old, so brave, looks after the others. Rosa, she is 7, always singing her mama songs. And baby Tomas, not even 2, her voice broke. They are being held at the mission in Taylor's Crossing until the train comes. 3 days from now." Elijah stood abruptly, moving to the window. The snow showed no signs of letting up. Taylor's Crossing was 2 days' hard ride in good weather. In this storm, with a sick woman, he shook his head. "I have medicine," Maria said softly behind him. "In my bundle. Apache remedies from my mother. The fever will break by morning." He turned back to find her eyes clear and determined despite her weakness. Something stirred in his heart, something he thought long dead. The quiet voice that had once led him to help travelers in need, to share what little he had. "You aim to steal these children?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "They are my blood, my sister's dying wish." Maria's chin lifted. "I would rather die trying than live knowing I abandoned them." Elijah sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. The smart thing would be to let her rest, then point her toward town come morning. Let someone else deal with this trouble. But Sarah's face floated in his memory, her last words begging him to help others where he couldn't help her. "Get some rest," he said gruffly, adding another log to the fire. "We'll need it if we're riding tomorrow." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "God bless you, Senna. Name's Elijah Boone." He busied himself checking his rifle, not meeting her gaze. "And don't thank me yet. Still not sure this ain't pure foolishness." But as he settled into his chair for the night watch, listening to Maria's breathing, even out in healing sleep, Elijah felt something shift inside him. Like spring ice breaking up on the mountain streams, letting light reach places long frozen. Doc. Whether it was God's hand or his own conscience pushing him back toward the world of men, he couldn't say that one thing was certain. His life of solitude had just been upended by a desperate woman's plea and 3 children he'd never met. Come morning, he'd see just how much his rusty faith could bear. Morning crept through the cabin shutters like a timid visitor, painting thin stripes of gold across the rough-hewn floor. Elijah stirred from his chair, his neck stiff from the night's vigil. The fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers that did little to ward off the dawn chill. He checked on the woman bundled in his blankets. Her fever had broken sometime in the night, just as she'd predicted. The Apache medicine from her bungle had worked its magic, crushed herbs that filled the cabin with a sharp, healing scent. Maria Santos opened her eyes, dark and clear now. "Good morning, Senna Boone." She pushed herself to sitting, though her hands still trembled slightly. "I must thank you for your kindness. No need for thanks." Elijah busied himself, stoking the fire back to life. "There's coffee, if you'd like." "Some. That would be welcome." She wrapped one of the blankets around her shoulders, watching him work. "I suppose you want to know why I came to your door last night." Elijah poured 2 cups of coffee, handed her one. "Reckon it has something to do with those children you mentioned." Maria's hands tightened around the tin cup. "My sister Elena, she died 3 weeks ago. Fever took her quick, left her 3 little ones alone." Her voice caught. "I promised, or I would care for them. But the territorial orphanage," she took a shaky breath. "They say a single woman of mixed blood cannot provide proper upbringing. They plan to send them east on the orphan train, separate them among railroad families who want cheap labor." Elijah's jaw tightened. He'd heard stories of the orphan trains, well-meaning folks thinking they were saving children by shipping them off to strangers. "How long do you have?" 3 days until the train comes." Maria's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I walked for 2 days after the church deacon in Miller's Fork turned me away. He said, without a husband and a proper household, I had no claim to the children, even though they are my own flesh and blood." She set down her coffee cup, squaring her shoulders. "That is why I came to these mountains. I heard talk of a man who lives alone, who once had a ranch but lost his wife. I thought perhaps—" "No." Elijah cut her off, standing abruptly. "If you are suggesting what I think you are, please, let me finish." Maria's voice held steel beneath its softness. "Mateo is 10 years old. Such a bright boy, always helping. With his siblings. Rosa is 7. She sings like an angel, just like Elena did. And baby Tomas," her voice broke. "He's not yet 2. He still asks for his mama every night." The words hit Elijah like physical blows. He turned to the window, but it couldn't stop the memories flooding back. Sarah, heavy with child, burning with fever. His desperate ride through another snowstorm, trying to reach the doctor in time. The weight of her in his arms as she slipped away, taking their unborn child with her. The endless, empty years since. I cannot let them be separated, Maria continued, softly. Cannot let them forget who they are, where they come from. The deacon said, I need a husband with a home and means to support them. I have nowhere else to turn. Elijah's hands clenched on the windowsill. You don't know anything about me. I know you helped a stranger at your door instead of turning her away. I know you listened when others would not. She paused. I know the look of someone who carries grief like a shadow. He turned back to find her standing, the blanket wrapped around her like a shawl. Her eyes met his steadily, without shame or guile. I'm not asking for love, Senator Boone. Only help to save my sister's children. She gestured at the cabin. You have a home, skills to provide, a reputation for honesty, from what I heard in town. That is all the orphanage requires. And what of after? Elijah's voice was rough. You expect me to play father to these children? I haven't lived with people in years. Wouldn't know how anymore. Maria's face softened. Perhaps God sent me here not just for the children's sake, but for yours as well. Loneliness is a slow poison to the soul. Elijah sank back into his chair, suddenly bone-weary. The silence stretched. Between them, broken only by the pop and crackle of the renewed fire. Outside, snow continued to fall, softening the harsh mountain edges. Finally, he spoke. I'll help you. The words surprised him even as he said them, though I'm not sure how yet. Maria's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you, she whispered. God bless you. Don't thank me yet, he warned. Still not sure this isn't pure foolishness. But something had shifted inside him, like spring ice breaking on the mountain streams. Whether it was God's hand or his own conscience pushing him back toward the world of men, he couldn't say. The morning sun had barely touched the frosted windows when Elijah saddled his horse. Snow crunched under the animals' hooves as they made their way down the mountain trail toward Fairview. The small settlement lay nestled in the valley below, its handful of buildings huddled against the winter cold like sheep seeking warmth. Elijah's breath clouded in the crisp air as he considered his mission. It had been months since he'd last ventured into town, and the thought of asking questions about the orphanage made his stomach twist. But Maria's words echoed in his mind, driving him forward. The telegraph office stood at the edge of town, its weather-beaten sign creaking in the wind. Elijah tied his horse to the hitching post, noting how the animal's flanks steamed in the cold. Inside, the telegraph operator, a thin man named Peterson, looked up from his desk with surprise. Well, if it ain't Elijah Boone, Peterson said, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. Ain't seen you in these parts since summer. Need some information, Elijah said, removing his hat. About the territorial orphanage. Heard they're moving children east on the railroad. Peterson's fingers drummed against his desk. Aye, that they are. Got a wire just yesterday about it. Railroad men been pushing hard to speed up the process. He shuffled through some papers. Seems they've got families back east willing to take on workers, children mostly. They're calling it placement for better opportunities. Elijah's jaw tightened. How many children? Batch of 12 leaving in 3 days. Some from Miller's Fork, others from Roundabout. Peterson peered at him curiously, taking quite in interest, ain't you? Thought you kept to yourself these days. Just asking is all. Elijah turned to leave, then paused. Any word on what it takes to claim guardianship? Law's pretty clear on that, Peterson said. Need a proper household. Man and wife, stable income. Railroad folks don't cotton to single folks, or, he hesitated, well, certain types trying to claim children. The implications in Peterson's tone made Elijah's fists clench, but he kept his voice steady, much obliged for the information. The ride back to his cabin seemed longer, heavy with the weight of what he'd learned. The sun was low in the sky when he finally dismounted, his boots crunching in the fresh powder. Inside, Maria looked up from where she sat mending her dress by. "The fire. What news?" she asked, setting aside her needle. Elijah removed his snow-dusted coat. "It's as you said. Railroad men are pushing things along. 3 days until they move the children." He struggled with the next words. "Law's firm about needing a proper household, man and wife." Maria's fingers twisted in her lap. "Then you see why I came to you. Marriage is the only way to save them." Her voice dropped lower. "I know it must pain you, thinking of taking another wife after—" "Don't." Elijah's voice was sharp. He moved to the window, staring out at the gathering dusk. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking," Maria said, firmly. "And I know what happens if you refuse. Mateo will be sent to work some stranger's fields. Rosa will forget her mother's songs. Baby Tomas," her voice caught. "He will forget us all." Elijah pressed his forehead against the cold window pane. Sarah's face floated in his mind, young, laughing, full of life. Then another image. 3 small children, torn apart, shipped off to separate lives among strangers. The fire crackled in the silence as evening deepened. Finally, Elijah turned from the window. Maria still sat by the hearth, her face painted in flickering shadows as she watched him. "I'll make you an offer," he said slowly, each word feeling like it was dragged from somewhere deep inside him. "Marriage, but in name only. For the children's sake, nothing more." He met her eyes. "You'd have a home here, protection under the law. The children would be safe." Tears spilled down Maria's cheeks, catching the firelight. "You would do this? Ain't right. What they're planning to do to those little ones." Elijah's voice was rough. "If this is what it takes to stop it, then so be it." Maria stood, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. "I accept your offer, Senergun, and I swear by all I hold holy, I will be a good wife to you, even if only in name." "Don't make promises," Elijah said quietly. "Just help me do right by those children." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady in the gathering dark. Inside the cabin, 2 lonely souls stood in the firelight, bound together by necessity and the fierce love of 3 children they had yet to save. Morning brought a pale sun that did little to warm the mountain air. Inside the cabin, Maria spooned cornmeal mush into 2 wooden bowls while Elijah stoked the fire. Their breakfast was simple: the mush, some dried apple slices, and coffee that steamed in tin cups. "Ain't much," Elijah muttered, settling onto his rough-hewn chair. "Used to having more stores by winter's end." Maria shook her head. "It is enough. In my village, we learned to be grateful for what little we had." She wrapped her shawl tighter and blew on her spoonful of mush. The quiet morning meal was interrupted by the distant thunder of hooves cutting through fresh snow. Elijah rose, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle mounted above the door. Through the frosted window, he made out a familiar figure on horseback. "Marshal Denton," he said, his voice tight. Maria's spoon clattered against her bowl. "The law? Already?" "Stay calm," Elijah advised, though his own heart hammered against his ribs. He opened the door just as the marshal reached the cabin. Marshal Denton sat tall in his saddle, his badge catching what little sunlight filtered through the clouds. His breath and his horses created twin clouds of steam in the cold air. "Boone." He nodded. "Been a while, Marshal." Elijah stepped onto the porch, boots creaking on the wooden planks. The lawman reached into his coat and withdrew an official-looking envelope. "Got business up this way." "This here's from the territorial orphanage." He extended the letter. "Seems there's some interest in your house guest." Elijah took the envelope, noting how the marshal's eyes drifted to the cabin door where Maria now stood, watching. The paper felt like ice in his hands as he broke the seal and unfolded it. His eyes scanned the formal writing, each word making his stomach sink further. Says here the children are being prepared for relocation. Already got families picked out back east. Maria rushed forward, her face pale. No, they cannot. Those are my sister's children. Her voice cracked with desperation. We must leave now, this minute, before they take them away forever. Elijah caught her arm as she turned to rush inside. Maria, wait. His grip was gentle but firm. Running half-cocked won't help anyone. Marshal Denton shifted in his saddle. Best handle this proper-like, through the courts. His expression softened slightly. Though I reckon time ain't on your side. Much obliged for the warning, Marshal, Elijah said, still holding Maria steady. The lawman touched the brim of his hat and turned his horse. Do what needs doing, Boone, but do it legal. With that, he spurred his mount and rode away, leaving fresh tracks in the pristine snow. Once the marshal was gone, Maria spun to face Elijah, her dark eyes wild with fear. You heard him. Time is running out. We must go now. And we will, Elijah assured her, guiding her back inside where the fire's warmth fought against the chill of fear. First thing tomorrow, we ride to town. Preacher Lawson will help us. Tomorrow? Maria paced the cabin floor. But the children need us. Thinking clear, Elijah finished firmly. We'll pack tonight. Rest. Start fresh at dawn. As evening approached, they gathered what they could. Elijah pulled down the old Bible from its shelf, dust marking where it had sat untouched since Sarah's death. He wrapped it carefully in a clean cloth while Maria folded blankets and packed. Dried venison into a leather satchel. The sun had long since set when they finished their preparations. Maria knelt by her borrowed bed, her whispered prayers in Spanish rising like smoke in the dim cabin. Dios mío, Dame Fuerzas. Per favor, protege a mis niños. Elijah watched her for a moment, then stepped outside into the bitter night air. Stars pierced the black sky like ice crystals, and the snow reflected their cold light. He hadn't prayed proper in years, not since he'd buried his wife and unborn child. But now the words came, rough and unpracticed. Lord, he whispered, his breath visible in the freezing air. Why her? Why now? He waited, as if expecting an answer from the silent mountains. You took Sarah from me. Took our baby before it drew breath. I accepted. That was your will. His voice grew hoarse. But now you send this woman to my door, with 3 little ones needing saving? The only response was the soft whisper of wind through pine boughs and the distant cry of a lone coyote. Elijah stood there, snow seeping into his boots until the cold forced him back inside. Through the cabin's single window, he could see Maria had fallen asleep, her face tear-stained but peaceful. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. For now, the mountain night wrapped around them like a blanket, and even the stars seemed to hold their breath. Waiting. Dawn painted the eastern sky in streaks of pale gold when Elijah stepped out of his cabin. Frost crunched under his boots as he made his way to the lean-to where his animals sheltered. The mule, Jenny, lifted her head at his approach, while his horse, Buck, stamped restlessly in the cold morning air. Easy now, he murmured, running weathered hands over their winter-thick coats. The familiar motions of checking hooves and brushing down brought comfort, a routine unchanged since Sarah's passing. He worked methodically, adjusting leather straps and cinching saddles tight. Maria emerged from the cabin wrapped in layers of wool, a bundle of provisions clutched to her chest. Her breath formed clouds in the crisp air as she watched him work. Will the snow be too deep? She asked, worry threading through her voice. Trails passable, Elijah replied, securing their packs, but slow going. Might take 2 days to reach Fairview. He helped her mount Buck, noting how she settled naturally in the saddle despite her heavy skirts. He climbed onto Jenny, and they set out as the sun cleared the mountain peaks. The day stretched long before them. Snow blanketed the narrow trail. forcing them to pick their way carefully between stands of pine and bare-branched aspen. By late afternoon, shadows lengthened across the white ground, and the temperature began to drop. "There's a sheltered spot ahead," Elijah called over his shoulder. "We'll make camp there." Maria nodded, her face pink from the cold wind. They found a hollow protected by towering rocks where Elijah had camped many times before. He cleared snow from a patch of ground while Maria gathered dry kindling from beneath the evergreens. Soon a small fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the rock face. Elijah stirred a pot of rabbit stew, adding the last of his dried vegetables. The warm aroma filled their shelter as darkness settled around them. "Tell me about them," Elijah said quietly, passing Maria a tin cup of stew. "Your sister's children." Maria's eyes softened in the firelight. "Mateo is the eldest, 10 years old now. Such a serious boy, always watching over his siblings. He helps with the youngest and never complains." She smiled, remembering. "He wants to learn everything. The stars, the plants, how things work." "Sounds like a good boy," Elijah offered, watching her face animate with love for these children he'd never met. "Say, he is. And Rosa," Maria's voice grew tender. "She is 7, with her mama's gentle heart. She sings the old lullabies, the ones my sister taught us. Even when times were hardest, Rosa found songs to lift our spirits." She paused, stirring her stew. "And baby Tomas, not yet 2 years old. He toddles everywhere, trying to keep up with his brother and sister. His laugh," she pressed a hand to her heart, "it fills any room with joy." Elijah stared into the flames, picturing these children in his cabin. Mateo helping with chores, Rosa singing by the hearth, little Tomas taking wobbly steps across the wooden floor. The images stirred something deep within him, something he'd thought long buried. "And you?" Maria's soft voice broke into his thoughts. "You speak little of your past." Elijah set his empty cup aside, the familiar ache rising in his chest. "Not much to tell. Had a small ranch once, down in the valley. Me and Sarah," he swallowed hard, "my wife." Maria waited patiently as he gathered his words. "Lost her to fever, 6 years back now." His voice roughened. "She was carrying our first. Neither one." He stopped, unable to continue. "Where?" Maria asked gently. "Buried them in the back meadow, where the wildflowers grow thick in spring." He stared at his calloused hands. Couldn't stay at the ranch after. Too many memories. Built the cabin up high where the silence didn't. Hurt so much. Maria reached across the space between them, laying her small hand over his larger one. The touch was light as a feather, but Elijah felt its warmth spread through his entire body. Neither spoke for a long moment, the gestures saying more than words could. The fire popped, sending sparks skyward. Maria's hand remained on his, a bridge across their shared grief. Around them, the night pressed close, but the hollow felt warmer. Somehow, as if their combined stories had carved out a space where healing might begin. Finally, Maria withdrew her hand, but the warmth lingered. She wrapped herself in a blanket and settled against her saddle. "Gracias," she whispered, "for sharing your sorrow with me." Elijah nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. He added wood to the fire and leaned back against the rock wall, keeping watch as Maria drifted to sleep. Above them, stars wheeled in the clear mountain sky, silent witnesses to this fragile trust growing between two wounded souls. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fairview's main street as Elijah and Maria rode into town. Shop bells tinkled in the cold air, and townsfolk hurried about their morning business, casting curious glances at the unlikely pair. The small white church stood at the edge of town, its weathered spire reaching toward the winter sky. Elijah helped Maria dismount, his hand steady at her waist. She smoothed her travel-worn skirts, trying to make herself presentable. Together, they climbed the wooden steps, their boots echoing on the worn planks. Inside, light filtered through dusty windows, illuminating empty pews and a simple altar. Preacher Lawson looked up from his Bible, his silver hair catching the morning light. Recognition flickered across his weathered face at the sight of Elijah. "Well, if it ain't Elijah Boone," the preacher said, rising from his chair. "Been years since you darkened my door." His kind eyes shifted to Maria. "And who might this be?" "Maria Santos, sir," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. They settled into the front pew as Maria explained their situation. Her sister's death, the 3 children at risk, the orphanage's intentions. The preacher listened intently, his lined face growing grave. "The railroad's been mighty quick to place children lately," he said, shaking his head. "Not right, splitting up families like that." He studied them both. "And you're seeking marriage to keep these little ones together?" "Yes, sir," Elijah answered, his voice rough with disuse. "Can you help us?" Preacher Lawson folded his hands. "I can marry you right enough, but the court'll want more than just wedding papers. They'll need proof you can provide for these children. A proper home, stable income." Elijah reached into his coat, withdrawing a folded document he'd kept hidden. "For 6 years, the deed to his land, 40 acres of mountain meadow and forest, including the cabin." The paper was creased, but intact, a reminder of the life he'd once planned with Sarah. The preacher examined the deed carefully. "This helps considerably. Shows you're established, got a proper place for children." He looked up at them. "You understand. Marriage is sacred before God, not something to enter into lightly?" Maria's fingers twisted in her lap. "We understand, preacher." "Very well, then." He stood, reaching for his warm Bible. "Stand here before the altar." Sunlight streamed through the windows as they faced each other. Maria's dark eyes met Elijah's, determination mingling with uncertainty. The preacher's voice filled the empty church as he read the familiar words. When it came time for vows, Elijah's throat tightened. "I, Elijah Boone, take thee, Maria Santos." The words felt strange on his tongue, yet as he spoke them, something shifted in his chest, like a door long rusted shut creaking open. Just slightly. Maria's voice was clear and steady as she repeated her vows, though her hand trembled in his. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, an awkward moment passed before Elijah briefly touched his lips to her forehead, a gesture more blessing than kiss. The sun was setting when they reached the town's only inn, casting long shadows across the muddy street. As they crossed the threshold, whispers followed them like autumn leaves. That Boone, the mountain hermit, took himself a wife? Mexican. Girl, by the look of her. The innkeeper's wife showed them to a small room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single oil lamp. Maria stood by the window while Elijah brought up their saddlebags, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. "I'll sleep on the floor," he said quietly, unrolling his bedroll. Maria nodded, relief visible in her shoulders. She sat on the edge of the bed, unlacing her boots. "Thank you, Elijah, for today, for everything." He lit the lamp as darkness settled outside. Its warm glow softened the strange intimacy of sharing such close quarters. They spoke in low voices, planning tomorrow's visit to the courthouse, where they would petition for custody of the children. "Tell me more about your cabin," Maria said, brushing her long dark hair. "What will the children need?" Elijah settled against the wall, considering. "It's simple, but solid. 2 rooms. Might need to add on come spring." He paused. "Got it good." "Well, plenty of game in the hills. Garden space, though it needs tending." "I can tend a garden," she offered. "Grow vegetables, herbs for medicine." They continued talking as the lamp burned low, their voices growing easier with each exchange. The awkwardness between them didn't disappear entirely, but it softened. like snow melting at the edges. Outside their window, Fairview settled into night. Elijah stayed awake, listening to Maria's breathing, even out in sleep. He thought about the children they would bring home, about the life growing around his quiet cabin. The future stretched before him, uncertain but no longer empty. Dawn painted the sky in streaks of pink and gold as Elijah and Maria made their way to the Territorial Agency office. The wooden building sat squat and official on the corner, its windows reflecting the morning light. Inside, coal smoke and tobacco hung thick in the air, mixing with the musty smell of old papers. The clerk barely looked up from his desk when they entered. His ink-stained fingers continued scratching across a ledger while Maria stepped forward, her spine straight as a fence post. "I've come for my sister's children," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Mateo, Rosa, and Tomas Santos." The clerk finally raised his head, his watery eyes taking in Maria's Mexican dress and Apache features. His lip curled slightly. "Papers?" Maria produced the marriage certificate from yesterday, along with her sister's death notice. "I am their aunt, their only living relative." "Marriage ain't enough," the clerk drawled, pushing the papers back. Across the scarred desktop, "Judge Atwood needs to review all Indian Territory cases personal-like. Could take weeks." Elijah noticed 3 men in railroad company coats watching from the corner. One stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Seems to me those children already got placements lined up with good Christian families back east." The clerk nodded eagerly as one of the railroad men slipped something that glinted like coins into his palm beneath the desk. "That's right. God, to think of their welfare, after all." Maria's hands clenched at her sides. "They belong with family, with their people." "Their people?" The clerk snorted. "Way I see it, half-breeds ain't really anybody's people." Elijah's muscles tensed at the insult. He took a step forward, but Maria's hand touched his arm, holding him back. Her fingers trembled against his sleeve, but her voice remained steady. "We will return tomorrow," she said, "and the next day, until we see the judge." The clerk shrugged, already turning back to his ledger. "Suit yourself. Judge might be weeks coming through." Outside, Maria walked quickly down the street, her skirt swishing against the boardwalk. Elijah caught up with her at the corner, seeing the tears she fought to hold back. "They mean to steal them," she whispered, "to erase who they are." Elijah guided her to a quiet spot between buildings, away from curious eyes. "We won't let that happen." They returned to the inn as afternoon shadows lengthened across the street. Maria paced their small room, while Elijah sat in the room's only chair, watching her distress tear at his heart. "What if we're too late?" she asked, wringing her hands. "What if they've already sent them away?" Elijah searched his memory, trying to recall words of comfort. Sarah had read the Bible often, sharing verses in quiet evenings. What had she quoted in times of trouble? "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow," he began hesitantly, "I will fear no evil." Maria stopped pacing, looking at him with surprise. "For thou art with me," he continued, the words coming back slowly. "Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." "You know the Psalms?" Maria asked softly. Elijah ducked his head, suddenly self-conscious. "Sarah, my first wife, she read scripture every night. Some of it stuck, I reckon." Maria sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "My sister loved that psalm. She would sing it to the children at bedtime." "Tell me about them again," Elijah said, wanting to keep that softer look on her face. "The children." A small smile touched Maria's lips. "Mateo is so serious for 10 years old, always watching out for the little ones. Rosa sings like a bird, making up songs about everything she sees. And Tomas," her voice caught, "he's just a baby still, barely walking." Elijah thought of his own child, the one he'd lost with Sarah before it drew breath. Something ached in his chest, not the sharp pain of years past, but a gentler sorrow, mixed with something that felt almost like hope. "We'll keep trying," he said, "every day until that judge shows his face." Maria nodded, wiping her eyes with the corner of her shawl. "Thank you, Elijah. I know this isn't what you wanted taking on a ready-made family. Maybe," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "maybe the Lord knows better than me what I need." They sat in comfortable silence as evening settled around them, the lamp casting warm shadows on the wall. Tomorrow would bring another battle at the agency office, but for now, they found peace in shared purpose and the quiet strength of Scripture remembered. Morning light streamed through Fairview's dusty streets as Maria and Elijah made their way to the general store. They needed supplies, but the whispers started before they even reached the porch steps. "That's Hemboon the hermit," a woman muttered behind her hand. "Married that Mexican Indian girl yesterday." Elijah's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes forward, holding the door for Maria. The store's bell jangled as they entered, and conversation died like a snuff candle. Mrs. Peterson, arranging dry goods on a shelf, turned her back pointedly. The storekeeper's smile didn't reach his eyes as he asked, "What can I get for you?" "Folks, coffee and flour?" Elijah said quietly, placing coins on the counter. Maria stood close beside him, her head high despite the hostile stares. "Heard she's trying to take them orphans," someone whispered. "Ain't right, mixing bloodlines like that. Them children deserve proper Christian homes," another added, loud enough to carry. Maria's fingers curled into fists at her sides, but she remained silent, dignity wrapped around her like a cloak. Elijah touched her elbow gently, steering her toward the penny candy display while they waited for their order. A stooped figure approached them, Mrs. Hammond, the baker's widow. Her wrinkled face creased with kindness as she pressed a warm package into Maria's hands. "Fresh bread," she whispered, patting Maria's arm. "Don't give up, dear. Some of us remember what it means to lose family." Tears pricked Maria's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered back. They left the store quickly, but not before hearing, "Judge Atwood won't stand for it." Railroads already promised them children to good homes back east. The day dragged on as they prepared for tomorrow's court appearance. Elijah polished his boots and brushed his coat, while Maria mended a tear in her best dress. They reviewed the papers they'd present, their marriage certificate, Elijah's land deed, Maria's documents proving her relation to the children. Evening settled over the town like a heavy blanket. They sat in their rented room above the inn, sharing Mrs. Hammond's bread with the last of their venison stew. The streets below had grown quiet when they heard it, a soft cry, like a wounded bird. Maria froze, her eyes meeting Elijah's. "Rosa!" She breathed. She flew to the window, Elijah right behind her. There, huddled against the inn's back wall, stood a small figure in a thin dress, shivering in the night air. "Me vida!" Maria choked back a sob as she rushed downstairs, Elijah following to watch for witnesses. The little girl threw herself into Maria's arms. "Ta, Maria." Rosa's tears soaked into her aunt's shawl. "I ran away. They were going to send us on the train tomorrow." "Sha, mi angelita." Maria wrapped her shawl around Rosa's trembling shoulders. "Come inside, quickly." Elijah scanned the empty street before ushering them up the back stairs. In their room, Rosa clung to Maria, her small face streaked with dirt and tears. "Where are your brothers?" Maria asked, smoothing Rosa's tangled hair. "Still at the orphanage?" Rosa sniffled. "Mateo wanted to come too, but he wouldn't leave baby Tomas. I followed the railroad tracks until I saw the church steeple you told." "Yes, about." Elijah's heart clenched at the thought of this tiny girl walking alone for miles. He pulled a blanket from the bed, draping it around her shoulders while Maria wiped her face with a damp cloth. "You're safe now, little one," he said gruffly, Rosa looked up at him with wide eyes. "Are you my new uncle?" Something shifted in Elijah's chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. "Yes," he answered softly. "I reckon I am." They made a bed for Rosa in the corner, using spare blankets and Maria's shawl. The girl fell asleep quickly, exhausted from her journey, but Maria sat beside her, stroking her hair and humming softly. "What do we do now?" she whispered to Elijah. "If they find." They won't," he promised. "Tomorrow we face the judge. Tonight we keep her safe." Maria nodded, her eyes never leaving Rosa's sleeping face. She walked so far, alone in the dark. My brave little bird. Elijah watched them both, the aunt who'd risked everything for these children, and the small girl who'd crossed miles to find her. He thought of his own empty cabin, how quiet it had been before Maria knocked on his door. Now, watching Rosa's peaceful sleep and Maria's tender care, he realized God had answered prayers he'd been too bitter to voice. They took turns keeping watch through the night, alert for any sound that might mean discovery. Rosa slept on, secure. In her aunt's presence, while outside their window, stars wheeled slowly toward dawn and the judgment that waited with it. The pale winter sunrise found Elijah and Rosa huddled in the shadow of the orphanage's back door. Frost crunched beneath their boots as he knelt to meet her frightened eyes. "You stay strong now," he whispered, adjusting her worn shawl. "We're coming back for you and your brothers, I promise." Rosa's bottom lip trembled. "You won't forget?" "No." "Little one." Elijah's rough hand smoothed her dark hair. "Your Aunt Maria and I will be at the courthouse this afternoon. You be brave until then." She nodded, wiping her eyes with small fists. Elijah watched as she slipped inside, his heart heavy. The click of the door closing echoed in the morning stillness. Back at the inn, Maria paced their small room, fingers working her rosary beads. She had pressed her best dress and pinned her hair carefully, determined to look respectable before the judge. Elijah donned his only good shirt, the one he'd married in just days ago. "Did she cry?" Maria asked softly. "Some," Elijah admitted. "But she's got spirit, that one, like her aunt." The courthouse bell tolled 2 o'clock as they climbed the wooden steps. Inside, the chamber smelled of tobacco and leather-bound books. Judge Atwood sat behind his elevated desk, his expression unreadable beneath bushy gray brows. Railroad men in expensive suits filled the front row. Elijah recognized William Porter, the company's land agent, whispering with a cluster of officials. The sight of their polished boots and gold watch chains made his worn clothing feel suddenly shabby. "The matter of the Santos orphans," Judge Atwood announced, shuffling papers. "Mrs. Boone, you petitioned for custody?" Maria stepped forward, her voice clear despite her trembling hands. "Yes, Your Honor. They are my sister's children. I am their only family. And you offer what provision for their care?" "My husband has land," Maria said. "A good cabin, clean water. I can teach them their letters, tend a garden. They'll have love, Your Honor." Elijah produced his land deed, the paper soft with age. 20 acres, sir. Paid for fair and square 15 years ago. Porter stood, a rolled map under his arm. "If it pleases the court, we have evidence regarding the property in question." Judge Atwood nodded, and Porter spread the map across the desk. Fresh ink gleamed on the parchment, showing survey lines Elijah had never seen before. "As you can see," Porter said smoothly, "Mr. Boone's alleged property falls within the railroad's land grant. His deed, while perhaps purchased in good faith, has no legal standing. That's a lie." Elijah's voice boomed through the chamber. "I worked at that land before the railroad ever came through." "Mr. Boone," Judge Atwood warned, "control yourself or be removed." Maria grabbed Elijah's arm. "Please," she whispered, "for the children." Porter continued, pointing to various markings on the map. The survey clearly shows the grant boundaries. Mr. Boone is technically squatting on railroad property. The judge studied the map, but his eyes kept darting to Porter's companions. One of them patted his coat pocket meaningfully. "This requires further review," Judge Atwood announced. "I'll need time to examine the survey records. The children," Maria started, "will remain in protective custody." The judge cut her off. "Until property rights are established, you have no standing to petition." A cry rang out from the back of the courtroom. "Tia Maria!" Rosa stood in the doorway, having slipped away from the orphanage again. Two officials moved quickly to grab her arms. "No," Rosa struggled. "Don't let them take me back. Per favor." Maria lurched forward, but Elijah held her back, knowing any outburst would only hurt their cause. Rosa's sobs echoed through the chamber as the officials dragged her away. "Court is adjourned," Judge Atwood announced. Already rising to leave, they stumbled out into the afternoon light, Maria's shoulders shaking with silent tears. Elijah's hands clenched into fists as he watched Porter and his men celebrate with handshakes and satisfied smiles. "How can they lie like that?" Maria whispered. "That map, they drew it just to steal your land." Elijah stared at his boots, shame burning in his chest. "My land means nothing. But those children," he trailed off, the image of Rosa's terrified face haunting him. They walked slowly back to the inn, the weight of defeat pressing down like a physical thing. The sun was setting, painting the sky in mockingly beautiful shades of pink and gold. Neither spoke, both lost in the memory of Rosa's cries and the corrupt justice that had shattered their hopes dot in their room. Maria sank onto the bed, her carefully pinned hair coming loose around her face. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice hollow. Elijah stood at the window, watching railroad men laugh over cigars in the street below. The false survey map had done more than threaten his property. It had destroyed their chance to save 3 innocent children from being torn from their heritage and family. The sound of Rosa being dragged away echoed in his mind, mixing with older memories of loss. He had failed to save his wife and unborn child years ago. Now he was failing these children too, all because of greed dressed up in legal papers and false maps. The inn's thin walls creaked in the night wind. Maria sat on the edge of their rented bed, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The single oil lamp cast wavering shadows across the worn floorboards. "I bring darkness to everything I touch," she whispered, her voice raw. "My Apache blood. It is cursed. First my husband, then my sister. Now these precious children." Her fingers twisted in her skirt. "Perhaps God himself turns his face from me." Elijah stood by the window, watching snowflakes spiral past the glass. His chest felt hollow, scraped clean of hope. The sound of Rosa's cries still echoed in his ears, mixing with older memories, his wife's last fevered breaths, the tiny grave he dug beside hers for their unborn child. "I can't do this again," he said finally, his voice rough. "Watch another family slip away." He reached for his coat. "Maybe it's best I return to the mountain, alone, like before." Maria's head snapped up, her tear-stained face catching the lamplight. "You would leave now? What else can I offer?" His hand trembled on the doorknob. "My land means nothing. My word means nothing. I'm just a broken man who couldn't even save his own wife." "Then why did you save me?" Maria's question cut through the darkness between them. "That night I collapsed at your door. Why bring me in from the snow?" Elijah's hand fell from the door. The memory of that night washed over him, the desperate knock, her blue lips forming those words. "Give me kids or I die." He'd thought her fevered, hallucinating, but he pulled her in anyway. "I reckon," he said slowly. "I reckon because leaving you to freeze would have been wrong. Plain wrong in God's eyes and mine. And this?" Maria stood, crossing to him. "Abandoning 3 children to strange families who will strip away their heritage, Their faith, their very names. Is that not also wrong? Elijah's shoulders sagged. The truth of her words settled into his bones, heavy as mountain stone. He'd spent years hiding from loss, but perhaps God had other plans. Perhaps this woman and these children were not a curse, but a chance at redemption. You're right, he admitted quietly. Running won't heal anything. Maria touched his arm, her fingers gentle. Then stay. Help me fight for them. She drew him away from the door, toward the small table where her mother's rosary lay beside his. One Bible. Let us pray together. God has not abandoned us yet. They knelt in the lamplight, their shadows merging on the wall. Maria's prayers flowed in soft Spanish, while Elijah's came hesitant and raw, unpracticed after years of silence. But something shifted between them as they prayed, a strengthening of the fragile trust that had brought them this far. Lord, Elijah whispered, I ain't been much for asking favors, but these children need a miracle. Show us the way. Maria's hand found his as they finished, warm despite everything. They rose slowly, the room feeling somehow less cold, less empty. Whatever comes, she said quietly, we face it together. As family. Elijah nodded, surprised by how right that word felt now. Family. Not just a convenient lie for the court, but something real taking root between them. They settled into their separate sleeping places. Maria on the bed, Elijah on his bedroll near the stove. But neither found rest easily. The night hours crept past until dawn began to pale the window dot as the first ray of sunlight touched the frost-etched glass. Hurried footsteps sounded in the hall. Someone knocked sharply at their door. Elijah opened it to find Sarah Miller, the general store owner's wife, her face flushed with urgency. Just heard at the telegraph office, she said, glancing over her shoulder. They're moving the orphans south by rail. Day after tomorrow. Maria was instantly on her feet. South? Where? Don't rightly know. But the railway's sending a special card to collect them. Heard them say something about Christian families waiting in Arizona territory. The news hit like a physical blow. 2 days. Just 2 days before the children would be scattered beyond reach. Thank you, Elijah managed. 4. Telling us. Sarah squeezed Maria's hand before hurrying away. God be with you both. When the door closed, Maria sank onto the bed, her face pale but determined. 2 days, she whispered. Barely time to breathe, let alone fight through more courts. Elijah paced the small room, his mind racing. The railroad had won the legal battle with their false map. But perhaps that wasn't the only way to win this war. We'll find a way, he said finally, his voice stronger than before. God didn't bring us together just to watch those children disappear. Maria looked up at him, hope flickering in her eyes. You truly believe that? I do. He sat beside her, taking her work-worn hands in his. You asked me to be their father. Well, a real father doesn't give up on his children. Not ever. The morning sun streamed through the window now, painting the room in gold. It caught the tears on Maria's cheeks, making them shine like prayers made visible. The sun had barely crested the eastern mountains when hoofbeats echoed through Fairview's empty streets. Elijah stood at the inn's window, watching the golden light paint the fresh snow. Maria dozed fitfully on the bed, exhausted from their night of prayer and worry. The steady rhythm of approaching horses drew closer. Elijah's hand moved instinctively to his belt, but he relaxed as a familiar figure emerged from the morning mist. Henry Talltree sat tall in his saddle, his dark hair bound back with a leather cord, his face weathered by years of riding the high country. Henry? Elijah whispered, remembering that bitter night 3 winters past when he'd shared his cabin and last stores with the freezing Ute Scout. Maria stirred at his voice. Who is it? A friend, Elijah said, already heading for the door. Maybe the answer to our prayers. They met Henry outside the inn. The scout dismounted with fluid grace, touching his chest in greeting. "Brother," he said to Elijah, then nodded. Respectfully to Maria, "I heard talk in the agency office about your trouble. News travels fast," Elijah said. "Truth travels slower," Henry replied, reaching into his saddlebag. "But it travels sure." He withdrew a leather map case, its edges worn smooth by time. "I was with the Federal Survey Party 2 years ago. We marked every section of this territory." Maria stepped forward, hope lighting her face. "You have proof about the land?" Henry nodded solemnly. "The railroad men lie. Their new map? False as a snake's legs." He opened the case, revealing carefully preserved documents bearing official seals. These show true boundaries. Elijah's cabin sits on homestead land, not railroad grant. Elijah's hands trembled as he examined the papers. "Henry, why would you help us?" The scout's dark eyes held steady. "You shared food when I was starving, kept me alive that night. Among my people, such debts matter." He glanced at Maria. "And children should stay with family. This is right path." Maria touched the scout's arm, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, friend." They wasted no time. Henry insisted on riding with them to town, his presence drawing stares from early rising townsfolk. At the courthouse steps, they found Preacher Lawson already waiting, as if guided there by Providence. "Come," the old preacher said, leading them to his modest home beside the church. "You'll stay with me tonight. We'll face them together tomorrow." Inside the preacher's warm kitchen, they spread the survey documents across his table. Henry explained each marking, each dated seal that proved the railroad's deception. The preacher nodded, his lined face grave but hopeful. "Truth stands," he sighed, touching his warm Bible. "If we remain steadfast, truth always stands." As evening settled over the town, Maria's anxiety for the children grew. She paced the preacher's small parlor, singing softly in Spanish, a lullaby her sister had taught their children. The melody drifted through the house like a prayer. A small voice joined her from the doorway. Rosa stood there, eyes bright with tears and hope. The little girl had slipped away from the orphanage again, drawn by her aunt's familiar song. "Mi amor," Maria breathed, gathering Rosa into her arms. They sank into the preacher's old rocker, Maria teaching her the words properly now, line by line. "A la puerta del cielo, venden zapatos." Elijah watched from his place by the fire, his heart expanding with each note. The sight of them together, Maria's gentle hands smoothing Rosa's hair, their voices twining in the lamplight, stirred something deep within him. This was what family meant. This was what he'd been missing. All those lonely years in his cabin. Henry sat quietly in the corner, a small smile touching his lips as he listened. The preacher moved around his kitchen, preparing a simple supper of beans and cornbread, humming along though he didn't know the words. "We should return her," Elijah said finally, though it pained him. "Before they notice she's gone." Maria nodded, pressing a kiss to Rosa's forehead. "Be brave, little one. Tomorrow we fight for you properly. Promise?" Rosa whispered. "Promise," Elijah said, surprising himself by kneeling beside them. "Your Aunt Maria and I won't stop until you're all home with us." They shared a quick meal, Henry and the preacher speaking softly of preparations for tomorrow's hearing. Rosa fell asleep in Maria's lap, secure in the circle of lamplight and love. When Elijah finally carried the sleeping child back to the orphanage, slipping her inside through a window she'd left unlatched, he felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly on his shoulders. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was about family, the one he'd thought forever lost, now being rebuilt before his eyes. He returned to find Maria still singing softly, teaching the lullaby to the preacher now. Henry sat cleaning his rifle, its metal gleaming in the firelight. Tomorrow they would face the railroad men again, But tonight they had truth on their side, and the strength of bonds that went deeper than blood. Morning sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the packed wooden benches. The air hung heavy with tobacco smoke and tension as Maria and Elijah made their way to the front. Railroad men in dark suits filled one side of the gallery, their faces hard as granite. On the other side, townsfolk whispered and shifted, some nodding encouragingly at the couple. Judge Atwood settled into his chair, adjusting his spectacles with practiced ceremony. His gavel struck once, twice, bringing the murmurs to silence. Court is now in session regarding the guardianship petition of Maria Santos Boone and custody of the minor children. Henry Talltree rose first, his bearing proud but humble. In his buckskins and braids, he stood out sharply against the suited lawyers, but his voice carried clear and strong through the courthouse. "I have known Elijah Boone for 3 winters," Henry began. "He saved my life when others would have left a freezing Indian to die. This man has honor." He gestured to the survey documents spread before the judge. "These maps show truth. The railroad's new claims are false as winter shadows. The railroads allow your jumped up objection. This man cannot testify about official surveys." "I rode with Federal Survey Team," Henry replied calmly. 2 years passed. Every marker, every boundary line, I helped place them. These new railroad maps? They lie. He tapped the authentic documents. Truth is here, written in ink and sealed by government hand. Judge Atwood leaned forward, examining the dates and seals. The railroad men shifted uncomfortably as he compared their maps to Henry's documents. Sweat beaded on their foreheads despite the morning chill. Maria sat straight back beside Elijah, her hand finding his as they waited. The children huddled in the back row with the preacher, little Rosa clutching her brothers close. Mateo, at 10 years old, tried to look brave for his siblings, while baby Tomas whimpered softly in the preacher's arms. When Henry finished, Maria stood. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with each word. "Your Honor, I have one more thing." From the folds of her shawl, she drew out a folded paper, worn at the creases. "My sister's last will, signed before she died." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The railroad lawyer's face darkened as Maria handed the document to the judge. "My sister knew she was dying," Maria continued, her chin lifted. "She named me guardian of her children. She trusted me to keep them together, to raise them with love and our family's ways." Judge Atwood studied the will, his expression unreadable. The railroad men huddled with their lawyer, whispering urgently. In the gallery, the old widow who had given Maria bread nodded approvingly, and others followed her lead. Preacher Lawson stood then, baby Tomas cradled against his chest. "Your Honor, if I may speak." At the judge's nod, he continued, "I have married many couples in my years of service, but few with such clear purpose as Elijah and Maria Boone. They came together to create a home for these children. Is that not what we want for our territory's orphans? Good homes with loving families." The morning light had climbed higher, warming the courthouse as Judge Atwood removed his spectacles, polishing them slowly. He looked at the children and Maria's desperate hope, and Elijah's steady presence beside her. His gaze swept over the townspeople, noting their encouraging faces, then to the railroad men's scowls. "The evidence before this court is clear," he declared finally. "The land claim of Elijah Boone is valid and unchallenged by a legitimate survey. Furthermore, the will of the deceased mother explicitly names Maria Santos, now Maria Boone, as guardian of these children." He paused, then added firmly, "This court finds in favor of the petitioners. Full custody is granted to Elijah and Maria Boone." The gallery erupted in scattered applause. The railroad men stormed out, their lawyer gathering papers with shaking hands. But Maria hardly noticed She had turned to the back of the courtroom, arms outstretched. "Mama Maria, Papa Elijah." Rosa broke free first, running down the aisle to throw herself into Maria's embrace. Mateo followed more slowly, trying to maintain dignity, but his face split in a wide grin as Elijah gripped his shoulder. The preacher brought baby Tomas, who reached for Maria with chubby hands. Elijah stood tall beside them, one hand on Mateo's shoulder, the other finding Maria's waist. "This is my family," he declared, his voice rough with emotion. "All of them." Henry Talltree gathered his documents, touching his chest in farewell. The preacher beamed, wiping tears from his eyes as he watched a new family embrace. Townspeople came forward to offer congratulations, the old widow pressing another loaf of bread into Maria's hands. Through the courthouse windows, morning sun spilled across the family like a blessing. Baby Tomas patted Maria's wet cheeks as she kissed him, while Rosa wrapped her arms around Elijah's legs. Mateo stood straight and proud, already looking more secure in his place between his new parents. They were together. They were family, and no one could separate them now. The wagon wheels creaked through fresh powder as Elijah guided the team homeward. Snow drifted down in lazy spirals, dusting Maria's shawl where she sat beside him, baby Tomas bundled warm against her chest. In the wagon bed, Rosa and Mateo huddled under blankets, pointing at deer tracks in the growing twilight. "Papa Elijah," Mateo called out, the new title still shy on his tongue. "How far to the cabin?" "Another day's journey," Elijah replied, his heart warming at the boy's words. "We'll make camp soon." When they found a sheltered hollow, Elijah helped Maria down while Mateo scrambled to gather kindling. The boy watched intently as Elijah demonstrated how to set a rabbit snare, his small hands following each twist of the wire. "Like this?" Mateo asked, pride lighting his face as he completed the loop. "Just right," Elijah nodded. "You're a natural." By the crackling fire, Maria rocked Tomas, humming softly. Rosa sat cross-legged beside her, adding her clear voice to the melody. The Spanish lullaby floated through the evening air, mingling with the pop of burning pine dogs. Suddenly, Mateo's snare rustled. "We got one," he exclaimed, and Elijah couldn't help but laugh at the boy's excitement, a sound that surprised him with its freedom. More laughter followed as they prepared their simple supper, filling the snow-hushed forest with joy that chased away years of silence. Looking across the fire at his new family, Elijah felt the hollow places in his heart beginning to heal. The mountain air sparkled with frost as they crested the final ridge. Elijah's cabin emerged from the pines, its weathered logs welcoming them home by mid-morning. Mateo and Rosa tumbled from the wagon, their boots crunching in fresh snow as they raced to explore. Inside, Elijah knelt at the hearth, coaxing flames from kindling while Maria moved purposefully through the small space, unpacking their meager belongings. The children's laughter echoed off the walls as they discovered each corner of their new home. "Look," Rosa held up a leather-bound Bible reverently. "Just like at church," Mateo examined Elijah's tools with wide eyes. "Can you teach me to use these?" As evening settled, lamplight cast golden warmth across the wooden table. Maria bowed, her head leading the children in grace, her soft Spanish words blessing their first meal as a family. Baby Tomas cooed from his makeshift cradle. After supper, Elijah stepped into the crisp night air. Through the window, he heard Rosa singing, Maria's gentle laugh, Mateo's excited chatter. His heart swelled with gratitude. "That night," he whispered to the stars, "when she collapsed at my door, she didn't just save herself. She saved me too." Returning inside, he gently lifted Tomas into his arms. The baby nestled against him, his laughter filled every corner of the cabin, chasing away the last shadows of loneliness. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.